From K-dramas and K-pop to deeper people-to-people ties, Hallyu is reshaping how South Korea and Japan connect. Do stay with us. Hello and welcome to Press Perspective for this Thursday, August 13th here in Seoul. I'm Min Sun-hee. The Korean wave is emerging as a powerful force in South Korea-Japan relations by turning a cultural phenomenon into a growing channel for closer ties. For more on this reality, I have writer Colin Marshall with us. Colin, it's great to have you here.
Glad to be here, thank you.
I also have Koichi Yonemura, the Deputy Foreign News Editor at Japanese daily The Mainichi. Koichi, it's been such a long time. Thank you for joining us live.
Hi, thank you for having me.
Lovely. We start here in the studio. Colin, let's begin with the findings of a joint poll that show a significant number of South Koreans sharing a favorable view of Japan.
Yes, this is a joint opinion poll conducted by an organization here in Korea, the East Asia Institute, and the International House of Japan in, of course, Japan, with the aim of getting an idea, getting a sense of what the Koreans think of Japan and what the Japanese think of Korea. And so this has been going on since, I think, 2013, about 13 years of data now, which is not that long, but a lot has happened in that time. So you do see quite a bit of fluctuation in the numbers. And they poll about 1,500 people in each country, so not a huge sample, but if representatively collected, it could tell you something meaningful. And what the big news is this year, as reported on by both Korean and Japanese media, is that, as you alluded to, South Koreans now have a higher, how to put it, a more positive view of Japan than ever before in the history of this poll, again, since 2013. And at the same time, Japanese views of South Korea have also grown more positive. But if you look at the actual numbers, it's a little like this. More than half of South Koreans polled reported a positive view of Japan. And it was more than half last year too, but it's risen by about 2% since then. So it's gone up. And among Japanese people, the Japanese people who responded, the view is about 35%. 35% reported a positive view of South Korea. It sounds low, but it actually has come up as well. And not reporting a positive view didn't necessarily mean a negative view either. So there is some space between in this poll as well. But the point being, the two countries seem to be on a positive trajectory in that the opinions, one's opinion of the other and vice versa, have been getting more positive and also less negative. Again, these are two separate measures over time. So naturally, this has been welcomed by the countries that have reported it, the countries involved. But you know, there are many factors in play, whether they're cultural, political, and economic, and those can be spun out into a nearly indefinite conversation.
Right then, before we touch upon those factors then, Koichi, do you suppose the summit diplomacy between South Korea and Japan has also played a part perhaps in strengthening the positive public sentiment?
Yes, there's no doubt that summit diplomacy has played an important role in keeping the current political relationship between Japan and South Korea stable. And one important factor is that both leaders, especially President Lee Jae-myung, have a strong intention to manage and maintain stable relations between Japan and South Korea. And for example, the President Lee made a courageous decision to maintain the framework for resolving the wartime labor issue that had been set by the previous administration. And when leaders maintain stable relations, government officials from both countries try, it seems to me, try more harder to prevent any issues that arise from escalating as much as possible. And but however, to be more precise, I would say that these diplomatic efforts by the leaders are more explain the reason why the relationship has not become worse.
Right. Beyond summit diplomacy, Colin, there are pundits who say that K-pop and in general the Korean wave has served to strengthen the people-to-people connection between South Korea and Japan. What are your observations here based in this part of the world?
In a lot of cases, you can see it on the street. You can see the sort of fortunes rise and fall of especially the South Korean love of Japanese goods, goods culture. It turns away from love, it comes back. You can see it on in certain neighborhoods of Seoul, how there will be, right now, you go to certain places and you'll see as much Japanese lettering. You'll see the actual kanji and katakana and hiragana on storefronts, bars, restaurants, cafes. Now, 6-7 years ago, that would have been very difficult to imagine in the heyday of the No Japan protests in the late 2010s over the semiconductor trade issue and other historical grievances that brought to the surface. You didn't see overt Japanese branding. You didn't see Japanese beer in convenience stores. And for a while, it just felt like this was going to last forever. Maybe South Korea has turned away from Japan permanently. But eventually, you started seeing it come back. And the memory of No Japan felt like it was just buried there for a while. It's not buried deeply, but that enthusiasm came back. And the Japanese enthusiasm for Korea has much deeper roots than many would expect. I think viewers in English language speaking countries might think of it as a similar phenomenon to the Hallyu or the K-pop culture they know from their own societies, which is a fairly recent thing. 5, 10 years, maybe 15. It goes back longer to the 1990s in Japan. Japan was the first country where Hallyu was really tried out, shall we say, with the push for exportation of South Korean popular culture began there with idols like Boa, really engineered, shall we say, to appeal to a Japanese audience, and with certain TV dramas as well that caught on, more followed that deliberately capitalized on the growing Japanese interest at the dawn of this century in South Korea. So I think this is not by any means a new phenomenon. This goes back a while. It goes back long enough. It's not a sort of world historical thing, but it goes back far enough that there's been more than one backlash to the Korean wave in Japan. So I think it's more a continuing saga than anything else. I mean, some people might be surprised. Westerners might be surprised that, Koreans would like anything Japanese, or that Japanese would like anything Korean. But in fact, there is a great deal of mutual appreciation, again, on the level of culture, travel, products, but these have been very strictly separated at times. The culture, yes, good. The politics, that somebody could hate the Japanese government but like Japanese food, for example, very common here. Or in Japan, somebody could enjoy Korean food but have an unfavorable, on this poll could have reported an unfavorable impression of Korea itself for other reasons, partially because of their perceived anti-Japanese sentiment in Korea. So again, there's a lot of complexity underlying it, but I think there is an agreement that really these two countries like each other's stuff in any case.
Right then. Staying with polls also, Koichi, there are findings that show that more Japanese women are marrying Korean men. How has this reality been explained there?
Actually, I have to put the number straight. I mean, if we look at the actual number, the number has not increased that much. For about 10 years, from 2014 to 2024, the number of Japanese women marrying South Korean men remained at around 1,600 per year. However, Japanese women marrying South Korean men may appear more noticeable because compared to Japanese men, there are less Japanese men, about 1,000 and 1,100 men married South Korean women in 2024, for example. So I think there is no doubt that the cultural factors, including K-pop, K-drama, have had an influence for that. You can easily get a sense of this if you take a flight from Tokyo to Seoul. My impression is that more of the tourists traveling from Japan to South Korea are women, and I would also guess that more women come to South Korea to study. And I think this is a sign of South Korea's soft power, including the large number of K-pop fans in Japan.
Right, I see. And against this backdrop, here's a difficult question, Colin. Can this cultural rapprochement, if you will, survive the next dispute over history, do you think?
I think that's an astute way to put it, the next dispute, because there always will be one. It's never if there's another dispute over Japanese-Korean history. There's always going to be one that comes for a variety of reasons. But this actually makes me think of my grandmother, may she rest in peace, who never really forgave Japan for Pearl Harbor. And she would she wouldn't even go into a Japanese restaurant for most of her life until sort of the last few years. She eventually was persuaded by my dad. It was his birthday. He wanted to go to a sushi restaurant. So she went with us and she actually liked it. You know, she had all these decades of resentment. They were eventually no match for this experience of one Japanese restaurant very late in life. You know, it always comes back to mind when I think of the combination of cultural appreciation but historical animosity one senses between well, one senses toward Japan in South Korea. But when I think to this particular case, I mean, it's hard to say how these two levels influence each other. You have again the commercial, the cultural level, and the historical one, which is deeper. Now, back in the days of the No Japan protests, you know, as I say, it seemed like this rift was never going to heal, that it was over. Japanese influence was over in South Korea for a while there. But then, you know, slowly but surely, it returned. And it emphasized something to me that I've been thinking about ever since I first came to South Korea, which is that anti-Japanese sentiment, it exists here for good reasons historically. We can say that, to do with the colonial period and other chapters of history. But it is also often used by political figures or business figures, higher-ups in general. It's often stoked by those figures. It's often stoked from above. And I think that's something to be aware of. I mean, it's something that the Korean people would do well to be aware of, that these emotions can be used. Emotions that are genuine and that there are reasons to feel can be used for political purposes, can be used for economic purposes, business purposes. You know, you get back to this question of what holds South Korean society together, because you know, a Westerner might look at it and see a very harmonious place, but when you stay here a little while, you realize this is not necessarily a harmonious society in political or other ways. So you ask yourself, what holds this country together? And I think anti-Japanese sentiment is one of the main things that has been used to hold this country together or to command the society. And I do wonder how long that will work. I think it has a certain runway ahead of it, but at some point, with World War II out of living memory and the colonial periods pretty much out of living memory now, there's going to have to be another way, and that has yet to be fully discovered. I'll put it that way.
Right. Koichi, I wonder, what are pundits there in Japan saying about the importance of promoting bilateral economic and security partnership, despite, of course, the presence of historical grievances?
Actually, not only experts, but also many ordinary people in Japan recognize the need for cooperation between Japan and South Korea. And one big reason is that two countries faces so many similar challenges. One of these is that, of course, geopolitical situation. Both countries are located very close to China and North Korea, which are building up their military capabilities. And also looking at the words and actions of Trump administration, honestly speaking, quite a few people in both countries are worried about how much we can keep really relying on the United States. And there are also social issues that we both face, such as a declining birth rate and aging population, as well as the changes brought about by AI, so on. And these are problems that are difficult to either country to deal with on its own. So there are growing calls in Japan to deepen cooperation with South Korea.
Right, for sure. There are a number of social issues that South Korea and Japan share. Beyond that, Colin, I wonder, how important is a stable South Korea-Japan relationship to the U.S. alliance system in this part of the world? Well,
very important in the eyes of the United States. I'm American myself, although I don't think that qualifies me uniquely to comment on this. Anybody can, and anybody can see as well, if they think about it, that you read these articles about bilateral agreements between South Korea and Japan, bilateral cooperation, bilateral commitment to denuclearizing the peninsula, not that they can do anything about that right now, bilateral this, bilateral that, but the US created the frame in which these two countries interact with each other. The US marshals the relationship between these two countries, and the relationship cannot go in a direction of which the US does not approve. So ultimately, yes, you can, it's encouraging to see cooperation between South Korea and Japan, but there is a third party looming over this discussion, any discussion, and it's Uncle Sam. And that's something that has to be taken into account when you think of what a real bilateral relationship would look like between these two countries. They're both allies of the US. The US has not necessarily made them allies of each other. It's created its own system here in this region. And you think of all the potential that there has to, if there were a real direct relationship between Japan and South Korea, economic potential, geopolitical potential, cultural potential, I think very little of that can be realized when you have the US looming over this relationship. I think back to the bubble era in Japan of the 1980s, when it looked like Japan was going to be the richest country in the world for a while there, before the bubble popped. There was a book that came out called The Japan That Can Say No, by the co-founder of Sony and another controversial politician. And this was a big book at the time. Now it's kind of a historical laughingstock, but I wonder if the time hasn't come for a Japan and a Korea that can say no to the current framing of their relationship.
Koichi, moving forward, this coming Saturday, August 15th, Korea celebrates National Liberation Day. Ahead of the celebration this year, are Seoul and Tokyo on a tangible, positive path toward reconciliation, in your opinion? If that is the case, what needs to be done to maintain the status quo, do you think?
Yes, of course. First of all, we should continue practical cooperation in areas such as the economy and security. At the same time, I think Japan and South Korea should work together to find ways to face historical issues directly without allowing them to develop into a new conflict. And academics and journalists, and in these days maybe YouTuber or some influencer, should play a central role in this process, while also involving politicians from both countries. And also, it is also important to continuously share those results of discussion to the among the ordinary people in both countries. And another thing I would like to see is more travel between Japan and South Korea, especially more Japanese people visiting South Korea. In the recent Japan-South Korea public opinion poll we talked about at the beginning, showed that about 70% of South Koreans had an experience of visiting Japan. And while Japanese people, only 30% of Japanese people have same experience. So I don't think it is desirable for this kind of imbalance to continue. So I would like to think of some ways to encourage more Japanese people to visit South Korea, because there are so many beautiful places and so many nice places to visit.
All right, thank you for those kind words. I wonder, Koichi, when's the last time that you visited South Korea?
Well, 2 months ago. I frequently travel from Tokyo to Seoul, so.
Good to know, good to know. Meanwhile, Colin, what do you recommend to maintain the current positive momentum?
Yes, well, I would underscore one of the things Koichi said, which is something I wanted to mention myself, is there is a bit of an imbalance between Koreans visiting Japan and Japanese visiting Korea. The countries are quite close together by global standards, but travel seems mostly to go one way. And I've seen this when I've gone to Japan in recent years. We'll stay at certain hotels, and it seems like everybody there is Korean. And even the staff, the Japanese staff, I'll overhear them speaking. They've picked up very basic Korean from the guests there. So you can definitely see the effects of especially travel on Korean cultural interests, and that's in action every day over there. And as well, to return to the first question, the question about this joint opinion poll, one of the artifacts, shall we say, or the interesting phenomena in the data is that in Japan, younger people have a much more favorable view of South Korea than older people. And I think something similar could hold true here in Korea as well. Although even the older generations in Korea will have favorable views of certain elements of Japan. I mean, I've met Koreans who lived in the colonial period literally, and they will still refer to Japanese things as if they were by definition superior, even if sometimes they might not be. So then it gets more complicated than it seems to an outsider sometimes. But if I have a recommendation, which is what you asked about, I think it helps to bear in mind, as I suggested earlier, that if in any country you're in any country you're from, if you find your feelings against another society, another country are being stoked, it's probably because somebody wants you to feel that way. There's a reason. Maybe it's a politician, maybe something else is going on, but I think there is plenty of anti-Japanese sentiment in Korea that is organic, and as I say, not without reason, but that also gets used to political ends. And I think the public here would do very well to be aware of when that's happening and to consider why it might be happening. It manifests in many different ways, in many different controversies, but don't let political projects hijack your feelings. That's the suggestion I would have.
All right, that's quite a bit of food for thought. All right, Colin, thank you so much for your time and your thoughts today.
Thank you.
And Koichi over in Japan, thank you so much for your time. And do give us a call when you're here the next time, Koichi.
I will.
Right.
Thank you.
Right, as the Korean wave continues to cross borders, its influence on Korea-Japan ties proves that culture can open doors where politics may struggle. On that note, we end Press Perspective for this Thursday. As always, thank you for watching.